morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the ornate iron gates. Among the crowd stood 8-year-old Emma Thompson, her small hand gripping her mother's fingers tightly as she pressed her face against the cool metal bars. Her eyes sparkled with wonder as she watched the famous red-coated guards standing perfectly still at their posts. Emma had been dreaming of this moment for months. Her grandmother had told her countless stories about the Queen's Guards, describing them as brave soldiers who protected the royal family with unwavering dedication. The little girl had saved every penny from her allowance, counting coins in her piggy bank night after night, determined to visit London and see these legendary figures in person. Her mother, Sarah Thompson, smiled warmly as she watched her daughter's excitement. They had traveled from their small village in Yorkshire specifically for this trip, and seeing Emma's joy made every penny of their modest savings worthwhile. Sarah had worked extra shifts at the local bakery to afford this special holiday, knowing how much it meant to her daughter, who had been fascinated by royal history since she could barely walk. The guard closest to them stood like a statue, his tall black bearskin hat adding to his imposing presence. His red tunic was perfectly pressed, adorned with gleaming brass buttons that caught the morning light. His face remained expressionless, eyes staring straight ahead as if looking through the crowd rather than at them. This was Guardsman James Mitchell, a 26-year-old soldier who had served his country with honor for 8 years. Emma studied the guard with intense curiosity, tilting her small head from side to side as she tried to understand how someone could stand so perfectly still. She had attempted to copy their stance at home, practicing in front of her bedroom mirror, but could never manage more than a few minutes before fidgeting or giggling. The dedication these soldiers showed amazed her young mind. Other tourists snapped photographs and chatted loudly about their sightseeing plans, but Emma remained quiet, completely absorbed in observing the guards. She noticed how their eyes never wavered, how their breathing was so controlled it was barely visible, and how they seemed completely unaffected by the bustling crowd around them. "Mummy," Emma whispered, tugging gently on her mother's coat sleeve, "do you think they ever get tired standing there all day?" Sarah knelt down to her daughter's level, speaking softly so as not to disturb others nearby. "I imagine they do, sweetheart, but they're very brave and strong. They've trained for years to be able to do this important job." Emma nodded seriously, her admiration for the guards growing even stronger. She had read in her library books about the discipline and training required to become one of the Queen's Guards, but seeing them in person made their dedication feel real and meaningful in a way that words on a page never could. As the morning progressed, the crowd around them shifted and changed. Tour groups came and went, cameras clicked constantly, and children pointed excitedly at the colorful uniforms. Through it all, Guardsman Mitchell maintained his position, his training allowing him to remain focused despite the constant activity surrounding him. Emma noticed that some tourists tried to make the guards react by waving frantically, making funny faces or calling out to them. She felt a bit sad watching these attempts, somehow understanding instinctively that these soldiers deserved more respect than being treated like entertainment. Her grandmother had taught her that real soldiers had families and feelings. Just like everyone else, they must miss their families when they're working, Emma said thoughtfully, still watching Guardsman Mitchell with growing concern. Her mother agreed, explaining that soldiers often made sacrifices to serve their country, spending time away from loved ones to keep everyone safe. This concept resonated deeply with Emma, who couldn't imagine being separated from her own family for even a day. The little girl's fascination grew into something deeper as she continued observing. She began to see past the uniform and ceremony to the person underneath. In her innocent way, she started to wonder about the guard's life beyond his duty, whether he had pets, what his favorite food might be if he enjoyed the same cartoons she watched on Saturday mornings. As noon approached, Emma noticed something that made her heart skip. Despite his perfect posture and unwavering gaze, she caught a brief moment when Guardsman Mitchell's eyes seemed tired, and she thought she saw him take a slightly deeper breath than usual. Her young intuition told her that even these incredibly strong soldiers were human beings who might sometimes need kindness. The realization struck her like a lightning bolt. While everyone around her saw the guards as tourist attractions or symbols of British tradition, Emma began to see them as real people doing a difficult job. Her empathetic nature, nurtured by her grandmother's wise stories about treating everyone with kindness, made her want to do something special, She thought about her own difficult days, times when she felt tired after school or lonely when her friends were busy. During those moments, a kind word or small gesture from someone always made her feel better. Maybe, she reasoned with the pure logic of childhood, one of these brave soldiers might appreciate the same kind of thoughtfulness. Emma's mind raced with possibilities as she watched Guardsman Mitchell continue his silent vigil. She wanted to show him that at least one person in the crowd saw him as more than just a tourist attraction. Her young heart was full of admiration and respect, and she felt compelled to express these feelings somehow. The afternoon sun was beginning to warm the courtyard, and Emma could see tiny beads of perspiration forming on the guard's forehead, despite the cool breeze. This small sign of his humanity only strengthened her resolve to reach out to him in some meaningful way. Her mother noticed Emma's intense concentration and growing excitement. "What are you thinking about so seriously, love?" Emma looked up at her mother with bright, determined eyes. "Mummy, I want to do something nice for the guard. He's been standing there for so long, and I think he might like to know that someone cares about him as a person, not just as someone to take pictures of." Sarah felt her heart swell with pride at her daughter's compassionate nature. This was exactly the kind of thoughtfulness she had hoped to nurture in Emma, the ability to see beyond surface appearances and recognize the humanity in everyone she met. Emma spent the next hour carefully considering her options. She watched as other tourists continued their attempts to get reactions from the guards, some becoming increasingly silly or disrespectful in their efforts. This behavior only reinforced her desire to approach the situation differently, with the genuine respect and kindness her grandmother had taught her. "What if I drew him a picture?" Emma suggested to her mother, remembering the colored pencils tucked away in her small backpack. Art had always been her way of expressing feelings she couldn't quite put into words, and she thought a drawing might be a perfect way to show her appreciation. Sarah encouraged this idea, helping Emma find a quiet spot on a nearby bench where she could work. As Emma carefully pulled out her supplies, she thought about what would make the most meaningful drawing. She decided to sketch the guard himself, but not just as a tourist might see him. She wanted to capture the dignity and strength she recognized in his bearing. With her small tongue poking out in concentration, Emma began sketching. She drew Guardsman Mitchell in his full uniform, but around him she added details that showed her understanding of his humanity. She drew a small heart floating near his chest representing his kindness. She added rays of sunshine around his figure, showing how she saw him as someone who brought light and safety to others. As she worked, Emma's excitement grew. She imagined how surprised and pleased the guard might be to receive such a thoughtful gift. In her mind, she pictured him smiling, though she had never seen his face change expression, and perhaps even saying thank you. The thought of bringing a moment of joy to someone who stood so seriously all day filled her with warmth. Her mother watched with growing amazement as Emma poured her heart into the drawing. The little girl added tiny flowers at the bottom of the page, explaining to her mother that flowers always made people happy, so surely they would make a soldier happy too. She colored his uniform with careful attention to detail, using her red pencil to make his coat as bright and proud as the real thing. "Should I write something on it too?" Emma asked, looking up from her artwork with bright eyes. "What would you like to say to him?" her mother replied, curious to hear her daughter's thoughts. Emma considered this seriously, tapping her pencil against her lip. "I want to tell him that I think he's very brave and that I hope he has a wonderful day, and maybe that his family must be very proud of him." With careful, neat handwriting that she had been practicing at school, Emma wrote her message at the bottom of the drawing. "Dear Guard, thank you for being so brave and keeping everyone safe. I think you are wonderful and I hope you have a happy day. Your family must be very proud. Love, Emma." When she finished, she held up the drawing to examine her work. The picture showed not just artistic skill remarkable for her age, but also the genuine emotion and thought she had put into every line. The guard in her drawing seemed to radiate warmth and strength, exactly how she saw the real Guardsman Mitchell. But as Emma looked from her drawing back to the imposing figure of the guard, a new worry crept into her mind. She had been so focused on creating her gift that she hadn't fully considered the challenge of actually giving it to him. The guards weren't supposed to move or react, and there were rules about approaching them too closely. "Mummy," Emma said, her voice suddenly smaller, "how am I supposed to give this to him? I don't want to get him in trouble or break any important rules." Sarah knelt beside her daughter, studying the beautiful drawing and the pure intentions behind it. She explained that the guards did have strict rules about maintaining their positions and not interacting with tourists. However, she also believed that sometimes genuine kindness could find a way to reach people even in the most formal circumstances. Perhaps, Sarah suggested gently, you could simply call out to him politely and see what happens. If he can't respond, at least you'll know you tried to share something beautiful with him. Emma nodded, but she could feel her heart starting to beat faster with nervousness. She had never spoken to a real soldier before, and the formal setting made her feel small and uncertain. What if her voice was too quiet? What if other people laughed at her? What if the guard thought her drawing was silly? Despite her worries, Emma's determination remained strong. She thought about her grandmother's words about courage, how being brave didn't mean not feeling scared, but doing the right thing even when you were afraid. This felt like one of those moments when she needed to find her courage. As they walked back toward the palace gates, Emma clutched her drawing carefully, making sure not to wrinkle or smudge her work. She could see Guardsman Mitchell in the same position where they had left him, still maintaining his perfect posture despite the hours that had passed. The crowd around the gates had grown larger as the afternoon progressed, with tour groups and families jostling for the best viewing positions. Emma felt even smaller among all the adults, but her mother's encouraging hand on her shoulder gave her strength. "Take your time, sweetheart," Sarah whispered. "There's no rush. When you feel ready, just speak from your heart." Emma moved closer to the gate, her drawing held protectively against her chest. She studied Guardsman Mitchell's face, looking for any sign that he might be receptive to her gesture. His expression remained unchanged, but something in her young intuition told her that beneath the formal exterior was a kind person who might appreciate her effort. Other tourists continued their activities around them, some still trying unsuccessfully to get reactions from the guards, others simply taking photos and moving on. Emma felt different from all of them. She wasn't here for entertainment or just to check an item off a sightseeing list. She was here because she genuinely wanted to connect with another human being and share a moment of kindness. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the courtyard, and Emma knew that her opportunity wouldn't last forever. Guards had shifts and schedules, and soon Guardsman Mitchell might be replaced by another soldier. If she was going to act, it had to be soon. Taking a deep breath that seemed to fill her entire small body with determination, Emma stepped forward. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure everyone around her could hear it, but she clutched her drawing tighter and prepared to speak. Emma moved as close to the ornate gate as the barriers would allow, her small fingers gripping the iron bars as she looked up at Guardsman Mitchell. The height difference made her feel even tinier, but she straightened her shoulders the way she had seen him do, drawing strength from his example of perfect posture and dignity. "Excuse me." "Mr. Guard," Emma called out in her clear, sweet voice that somehow managed to carry despite her nervousness. The simple words seemed to hang in the air, cutting through the ambient noise of tourist chatter and camera clicks. Several nearby tourists turned to look at the little girl with amused expressions, some pulling out their phones to record what they assumed would be another failed attempt to get a reaction from the stoic soldier. But Emma paid no attention to the growing audience around her. Her focus was entirely on the guard, and she could feel her grandmother's teachings about treating everyone with respect and kindness guiding her words. "I know you're working very hard," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And I wanted to thank you for keeping everyone safe. I made something special for you because I think you're very brave." She held up her drawing, pressing it against the gate so he could see her artwork clearly. The picture showed all the care and attention she had put into every detail. From the perfectly colored red uniform to the sunshine rays that represented her admiration for his service, for what seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. Guardsman Mitchell maintained his rigid stance, eyes fixed straight ahead, giving no indication that he had heard her words or seen her offering. Emma felt a moment of disappointment beginning to creep in, but she refused to give up so easily. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to the crowd gathering around them, something remarkable was happening behind Guardsman Mitchell's professional exterior. James Mitchell had indeed heard every word of Emma's sincere address, and her genuine kindness had touched something deep within him that years of military discipline had taught him to keep carefully controlled. In his 8 years of service, James had experienced countless interactions with tourists, Most treated the guards like living statues or tourist attractions, trying to make them laugh, flinch, or break character for the sake of a funny photo or video. He had developed a thick skin against such behavior, understanding it as part of his duty to maintain dignity regardless of external provocations. But Emma's approach was entirely different. Her words carried a sincerity and respect that he rarely encountered. She wasn't trying to get a reaction for entertainment. She was genuinely trying to express gratitude and share kindness. The soldier in him remained disciplined and focused, but the human being within was deeply moved by this unexpected gesture. James could see the drawing in his peripheral vision, a child's artwork that somehow captured not just his physical appearance but seemed to reflect an understanding of the honor and responsibility he carried in his role. The message she had written touched him even more deeply, showing a maturity and empathy remarkable in someone so young. Emma waited patiently, still holding her drawing up for him to see. Her mother watched from a few steps behind, her heart swelling with pride at her daughter's courage and persistence. Even if the guard couldn't respond, Sarah could see that Emma's gesture was meaningful simply in the giving. "I know you probably can't talk to me," Emma continued, her voice filled with understanding beyond her years, "but I wanted you to know that someone thinks you're doing a wonderful job. My grandmama always says that everyone deserves to hear something nice about themselves, even if they can't say thank you back." The crowd around them had grown quieter, drawn in by the sincerity of the little girl's words. Some of the tourists who had initially pulled out cameras to record what they expected to be a humorous moment found themselves putting their devices away, sensing that they were witnessing something more profound than typical tourist antics. James felt his chest tighten with emotion as Emma's words continued to reach him. Her grandmother's wisdom about everyone deserving kindness resonated with him deeply. As a soldier, he was used to being thanked for his service, but usually in formal, brief interactions. Emma's heartfelt expression of gratitude felt different, more personal and genuine than anything he had experienced while on duty. "I put a heart on the drawing," Emma explained, pointing to the small symbol she had carefully colored red, "because I think you must have a very kind heart to do such an important job. And I drew sunshine around you because you make people feel safe and happy, just like sunshine does." The child's innocent interpretation of his role as a source of comfort and security struck James powerfully. In the serious, disciplined world of military service, he rarely had the opportunity to consider the emotional impact of his presence on others. Emma's perspective reminded him that beyond the ceremony and tradition, his role genuinely meant something to people. Emma's mother stepped forward slightly, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Emma, sweetheart, I think you've shared your beautiful message. Even if the guard can't respond right now, I'm sure he appreciates your kindness." But Emma wasn't quite ready to give up. She had come this far, and something in her young intuition told her that her words were reaching the person behind the uniform. She looked up at Guardsman Mitchell with her bright, hopeful eyes, and in that moment, their humanity connected across the formal barriers of duty and protocol. "I hope you get to go home to your family soon," Emma said softly, her final words carrying all the warmth and caring that had motivated her gesture from the beginning. "And I hope they tell you how proud they are of you, because you should know that you're very special." The sincerity in her voice, the genuine care in her expression, and the thoughtful gift she had created combined to create a moment that transcended the usual boundaries between soldier and civilian, adult and child, duty and emotion. Emma had managed to see past the formal exterior to recognize and honor the person within, offering him exactly the kind of human connection that military protocol typically prevented. As she stood there holding her drawing, Emma represented everything good about childhood: the ability to see beyond surface appearances, the courage to reach out with kindness, and the wisdom to treat everyone with dignity and respect. Her gesture was about to create a response that would surprise everyone present and create a memory that would last a lifetime. For several heartbeats, the courtyard seemed suspended in time. Emma continued to hold her drawing against the gate, her small face filled with hope and determination. The crowd around them had grown unusually quiet, as if collectively holding their breath to see what would happen next. Even the most cynical tourists seemed touched by the little girl's genuine sincerity. Then, something extraordinary occurred that no one in the crowd expected, least of all Emma herself. Guardsman James Mitchell, maintaining his perfect military posture and keeping his eyes fixed straight ahead as protocol demanded, began to speak. His voice was measured and professional, but those who listened carefully could detect an unmistakable warmth threading through his formal tone. "Thank you for your kind words, young lady," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the courtyard with the same precision that marked his physical bearing. "Your thoughtfulness is deeply appreciated and your drawing is quite remarkable." A collective gasp rose from the gathered tourists. Cell phones that had been lowered in respect were quickly raised again as people realized they were witnessing something truly unprecedented. In all their years of visiting London, none of them had ever seen one of the Queen's guards break protocol to respond to a tourist, let alone engage in conversation. Emma's eyes widened with pure joy and amazement. Her drawing trembled slightly in her small hands as the full impact of what was happening began to sink in. The guard had not only heard her words but had chosen to respond, acknowledging her gesture in a way that validated every ounce of courage she had summoned to approach him. "You really heard me?" Emma asked, her voice filled with wonder and delight. "Every word," James confirmed, still maintaining his formal stance while allowing his voice to convey the genuine emotion her gesture had stirred within him. "Your grandmother sounds like a very wise woman, and she has clearly taught you well about showing kindness to others." Behind his professional exterior, James was making a decision that went against years of rigid training. Protocol dictated that guards should not engage with tourists under any circumstances, maintaining the dignity and mystery of their role through absolute silence and stillness. However, Emma's pure-hearted gesture had touched something within him that transcended military regulations. He understood that this moment was about more than following rules. It was about recognizing and honoring genuine human kindness when it was offered so freely and sincerely. Emma had treated him not as a tourist attraction or a living statue, but as a real person deserving of respect and consideration. Such authentic connection deserved acknowledgement, even if it meant bending the usual protocols. "Is it hard to stand so still for so long?" Emma asked, emboldened by his response and filled with the natural curiosity that drove all her interactions with the world. James allowed the faintest smile to touch the corners of his mouth, though his eyes remained fixed ahead as his training required. "It requires practice and discipline, but knowing that people like you appreciate what we do makes it much easier." Emma's mother watched in amazement as this unprecedented conversation unfolded. She had expected their visit to be a typical tourist experience, perhaps with some nice photos and memories of seeing the famous guards. Instead, her daughter's natural empathy and courage had created a moment that was clearly extraordinary for everyone involved. The crowd around them was growing, larger as word spread through the tourist area that one of the guards was actually talking. People hurried over with cameras and phones, eager to witness this rare breach of the famous silence that characterized the Queen's Guard. However, the respectful tone that Emma had established seemed to influence the entire gathering, and the atmosphere remained remarkably reverent rather than chaotic. "I drew a heart on the picture because I thought you must have a good heart to do such an important job," Emma explained, pointing again to her artwork with growing confidence. "Was I right about that?" This question struck James particularly deeply. In the serious world of military service, discussions about emotions and personal qualities were rare. Emma's innocent inquiry about his heart, her assumption that kindness was a prerequisite for his role, reminded him of why he had chosen this path of service in the first place. "I believe," James said carefully, "that anyone who chooses to serve others must indeed have room in their heart for caring about people's safety and well-being. Your grandmother was right that everyone deserves to hear something nice about themselves, and I want you to know that your kindness today has meant more to me than you might realize." Emma beamed with happiness, her entire face lighting up with the joy of successful connection. She had hoped to bring a moment of brightness to the guard's day, but she was discovering that reaching out with kindness created happiness for the giver as much as the receiver. "Can I leave my drawing here for you?" Emma asked hopefully. "I made it especially for you and I want you to have it." James faced a practical dilemma. While he was deeply touched by her offer and genuinely wanted to accept her thoughtful gift, his position prevented him from moving to take the drawing. However, his training had also taught him to be resourceful in solving problems while maintaining his duties. "I would be honored to receive your artwork," he said warmly. "Perhaps you could give it to one of my colleagues who isn't currently on post duty, and they could ensure it reaches me properly." As if summoned by his words, another guardsman appeared from within the palace grounds, Sergeant Williams, who had been observing the interaction with growing amazement and approval. He had served alongside James for several years and had never seen his colleague break protocol in such a manner. But he could immediately understand why this particular situation warranted an exception. Sergeant Williams approached the gate with measured steps, his own formal bearing intact but his expression showing unmistakable warmth as he looked down at Emma. The little girl's gesture had clearly touched more than just guardsmen. Mitchell. It had created ripples of appreciation throughout the guard unit. "Miss Emma," Sergeant Williams said with formal courtesy, "it would be my pleasure to ensure that Guardsman Mitchell receives your beautiful gift properly." Emma looked up at this new soldier with the same respectful attention she had shown James, recognizing immediately that he too was someone worthy of her consideration and courtesy. She carefully slid her drawing through the ornate bars of the gate, watching as Sergeant Williams received it with the same careful attention he might give to any important document. Sergeant Williams examined Emma's drawing with genuine interest and appreciation, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of her careful work. The artwork showed not just artistic ability impressive for her age, but also a deep understanding of what the Guard service meant. The heart she had drawn, the sunshine rays, and especially her written message revealed a maturity and empathy that moved him deeply. "This is truly exceptional work, Miss Emma," Sergeant Williams said with sincere admiration. "I can see that you put a great deal of thought and care into creating this gift. Guardsman Mitchell is very fortunate to receive something so meaningful." Emma's face glowed with pride and happiness. Having her artwork appreciated by not one but two of the Queen's Guards felt like the greatest honor she could imagine. Her nervous energy had transformed into pure joy as she realized that her simple gesture of kindness had been received with such warmth and respect. "Will he really be able to keep it?" Emma asked hopefully, wanting to ensure that her gift wouldn't just disappear into some official procedure or protocol. "Absolutely," Sergeant Williams assured her with a warm smile that transformed his usually serious expression. "Personal gifts from the public that are given with such genuine appreciation are treasured by our soldiers. I guarantee that Guardsman Mitchell will not only keep your drawing, but will likely share the story of your kindness with his family and fellow guards for years to come." Behind them, James Mitchell continued his post, but Emma could sense that something had changed in his bearing. While he maintained his professional stance and forward gaze, there seemed to be a new lightness about him, as if her words had lifted some invisible weight from his shoulders. The crowd around them had grown to include dozens of tourists, all drawn by word that something unprecedented was happening at the palace gates. However, instead of the chaos that might typically accompany such attention, the atmosphere remained respectful and even reverent. Emma's example of treating the guards with genuine respect seemed to have influenced everyone present. "Miss Emma," Guardsman Mitchell said, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, "before you continue your visit to London, I want you to know that your grandmother should be very proud of the young lady she has helped raise. Your kindness today has reminded me why I chose to serve, and why protecting people like you and your family is such an honor." These words struck Emma with their profound meaning. To know that she had somehow reminded a real soldier of his purpose felt almost too important for her young mind to fully grasp. She understood that she had given him something valuable, but she was only beginning to realize that the exchange had been mutual. His acknowledgement and respect had given her something precious in return. "My grandmama always says that kindness is like throwing a stone in a pond," Emma replied thoughtfully, repeating one of her grandmother's favorite sayings. "The ripples keep spreading out wider and wider, touching places you never expected." Sergeant Williams exchanged a meaningful glance with his colleague, both soldiers recognizing the wisdom in the child's words. In their years of service, they had seen how individual acts of courage and kindness could indeed spread far beyond their original intentions, creating positive changes in ways that were often impossible to predict or measure. "Your grandmother is absolutely right," Sergeant Williams confirmed. "Today your kindness has created ripples that will spread much further than you might imagine." Emma's mother stepped forward, her heart full of pride for her daughter's courage and compassion. She had watched the entire interaction with growing amazement, seeing her child demonstrate qualities that many adults struggled to show consistently. The way Emma had approached the guards with genuine respect and care reflected the values Sarah had worked so hard to instill. "Emma, sweetheart," her mother said gently, "I think we should let these kind gentlemen return to their important work. You've shared something beautiful with them, and they've given you a wonderful memory in return." Emma nodded, understanding, but she wasn't quite ready to leave. She had one more thing she wanted to say, something that had been building in her heart throughout this remarkable encounter. "Guardsman Mitchell," she called out one final time, "I want you to know that seeing you today has made me want to be braver in my own life. When I grow up, I want to find ways to serve people and make them feel safe, just like you do." The impact of these words on both guards was visible even through their professional composure. To hear that their service had inspired a young person to consider her own future in terms of helping others represented the highest compliment their work could receive. They had joined the military to serve and protect, but rarely did they get to see so directly how their example might influence the next generation. "That is the finest thing anyone has ever said to me while on duty," James responded, his voice carrying a slight tremor of emotion that his training couldn't entirely suppress. "Whatever path you choose in life, Miss Emma, I have no doubt that you will make a positive difference in the world." As Emma finally prepared to leave, she took one last long look at both guards, memorizing every detail of their uniforms, their bearing, and especially the kindness she had seen in their responses to her gesture. She understood instinctively that this moment would become one of her most treasured memories, a touchstone she could return to whenever she needed to remember the power of reaching out with genuine care and respect. The crowd began to disperse as word spread that the remarkable conversation was concluding. Many of the tourists who had witnessed the exchange walked away with thoughtful expressions, perhaps reconsidering their own approaches to interacting with people in service roles. Emma's example had demonstrated that treating others with authentic respect and kindness could create connections that transcended normal social boundaries. Sergeant Williams carefully tucked Emma's drawing into his uniform, ensuring its safety until he could properly deliver it to his colleague. The artwork would indeed become a treasured possession, displayed in James Mitchell's quarters as a reminder of the day a little girl's kindness had touched his heart and renewed his sense of purpose. As Emma and her mother walked slowly away from the palace gates, the little girl's mind was already spinning with plans. She wanted to write to her grandmother immediately, sharing every detail of what had happened. She also found herself thinking about other ways she might show appreciation for people who served others, perhaps making cards for local police officers, or thanking the crossing guards at her school more thoughtfully. The ripples of kindness that Emma had set in motion were indeed spreading, just as her grandmother had taught her they would, touching lives and inspiring others in ways that would continue long after this extraordinary day at Buckingham Palace. That evening, back in their small hotel room overlooking a quiet London street, Emma sat cross-legged on the bed with paper and pen, carefully crafting a letter to her grandmother. Her small fingers gripped the pen with intense concentration as she tried to capture every detail of the remarkable day she had experienced. "Dear Grandmama," she began in her neat school handwriting, "today something amazing happened that I know you will want to hear about. I met one of the Queen's guards and he talked to me. It was just like you always say about kindness making ripples in a pond." Emma paused in her writing, looking up at her mother who was organizing their sightseeing photos from the day. Many of the pictures showed Emma standing at the palace gates, but none could capture the true magic of what had transpired during her conversation with Guardsman Mitchell. "Mummy, do you think Grandmama will believe that the guard really talked to me?" Emma asked, suddenly worried that her story might sound too incredible to be true. Sarah smiled warmly, sitting down beside her daughter on the bed. "Sweetheart, your grandmother has always believed that wonderful things happen when people approach the world with genuine kindness. She'll not only believe your story, but she'll probably say she's not surprised at all." Encouraged by her mother's words, Emma returned to her letter with renewed enthusiasm. She described every moment of her interaction with the guards, from her initial nervousness to the joy she felt when Guardsman Mitchell responded to her greeting. She wrote about how Sergeant Williams had carefully taken her drawing and promised to deliver it safely. Meanwhile, several miles away at the guards' quarters within the palace complex, James Mitchell was experiencing his own evening of reflection. His shift had ended 2 hours after Emma's visit, but the memory of her sincere gesture continued to occupy his thoughts in the most positive way. Sergeant Williams had indeed delivered Emma's drawing promptly, presenting it to James with a formal ceremony that both honored the gift and acknowledged the unusual circumstances under which it had been received. James now sat in his small room, studying the artwork with continued amazement at the care and thought the little girl had put into every detail. The drawing was pinned to the small bulletin board above his desk, positioned where he could see it easily whenever he was in his quarters. James had also begun composing his own letter, not to Emma, as he had no way to reach her, but to his own family back in Scotland, sharing the story of how a little girl's kindness had brightened what could have been just another routine day of duty. "You would have loved meeting her, Mum," James wrote to his mother. "She reminded me so much of how you taught me to see the good in people and to always treat others with respect, no matter what their job or position might be." This little girl somehow understood that behind the uniform is just a regular person who appreciates being seen and valued. As James continued writing, he found himself reflecting on why Emma's gesture had affected him so profoundly. In his years of service, he had received formal thanks from officials and ceremonial recognition for his duties, but Emma's approach had been entirely different. She had spoken to him not because she was supposed to, but because she genuinely wanted to share kindness with another human being. Back at the hotel, Emma was describing her grandmother's teachings in her letter. "You were right about treating everyone with kindness, Grandmama. The guard told me that my words meant more to him than I could realize. I think he was lonely standing there all day with people taking pictures but not really seeing him as a person." Emma's insight was remarkably mature for her age. She had instinctively understood that beneath the ceremony and tradition, the guards were individuals who might appreciate genuine human connection. Her grandmother's lessons about empathy and compassion had prepared her to recognize this need and respond to it naturally. Sarah watched her daughter write with growing pride and amazement. The events of the day had clearly made a deep impression on Emma, but more importantly, they had confirmed that the values they had been teaching her were taking root in meaningful ways. Emma wasn't just following rules about being polite. She was developing genuine care for others that motivated her to reach out even in unusual or challenging circumstances. "I want to do more things like this," Emma continued in her letter. "Maybe we could make cards for the people who work at the fire station, or bring cookies to the mail carrier. I learned today that when you're brave enough to show kindness to someone, it makes both people feel happy." As Emma wrote these words, she was unknowingly describing one of the most important lessons anyone can learn about human connection. Her experience with Guardsman Mitchell had taught her that kindness was not just about following social expectations, but about recognizing and honoring the humanity in everyone she encountered. The story of Emma's gesture had begun to spread beyond just the immediate participants. Other guards who had witnessed the interaction shared it with their colleagues, creating discussions about the importance of their public role and the impact they could have on people, like Emma, who approached them with genuine respect. Sergeant Williams found himself telling the story to his wife over dinner, describing how moved he had been to see a child treat the guards not as tourist attractions, but as real people deserving of consideration and gratitude. His wife, a teacher, immediately recognized the significance of Emma's behavior and suggested that this kind of authentic empathy was exactly what they hoped to see in their own students. "It's rare to see someone so young understand that everyone, regardless of their job or position, deserves to be treated with dignity," she observed. "That little girl clearly has parents and grandparents who have taught her well about what really matters in life." As the evening progressed, Emma finished her letter and carefully sealed it in an envelope, already excited about mailing it the next morning. She had also started a new drawing, this time depicting herself and the guards together, with smiles on everyone's faces and hearts floating above their heads to represent the happiness that had been shared. "Mummy, do you think I'll ever see Guardsman Mitchell again?" Emma asked as she prepared for bed. "I don't know, sweetheart," Sarah replied honestly, "but I think that's not really the most important thing. What matters is that you shared something beautiful with him today, and that experience has changed both of you in positive ways. Even if you never see him again, you'll always carry this memory, and he'll always remember the day a kind little girl reminded him why his service matters." Emma nodded thoughtfully, understanding that some of life's most meaningful moments were complete in themselves, not requiring follow-up or continuation to be valuable. She had given freely of her kindness and creativity, and in return had received acknowledgement, respect, and the satisfaction of knowing she had brightened someone's day. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Emma's dreams were filled with images of soldiers and guards, but also with ordinary people in everyday jobs: shop clerks, bus drivers, crossing guards, janitors, all of whom deserved the same kind of recognition and appreciation she had shown to Guardsman Mitchell. Her experience at Buckingham Palace had opened her eyes to possibilities for kindness that extended far beyond royal ceremonies and tourist attractions. The ripples of her gesture were indeed spreading, exactly as her grandmother had predicted, reaching into corners of the world she couldn't yet imagine, and inspiring others to consider how they might approach their own interactions with greater empathy and genuine care. 3 months later, back in their small Yorkshire village, Emma had become something of a local celebrity. Word of her encounter with the Queen's Guard had spread throughout their community, shared proudly by her mother and grandmother with friends, neighbors, and anyone who would listen. But Emma herself remained remarkably unchanged by the attention, continuing to approach the world with the same genuine kindness that had made her palace experience so special. The letter she had written to her grandmother had been framed and hung in the elderly woman's sitting room, where visitors were inevitably drawn to ask about the story behind it. Emma's grandmother never tired of telling the tale, using it as an example of how the values she had tried to instill in her granddaughter could create beautiful moments in the most unexpected circumstances. "You see?" she would explain to anyone who would listen. Emma didn't approach that guard because she wanted something from him, or because she thought it would make her famous. She reached out because she recognized another human being who deserved kindness and appreciation. That's the difference between real compassion and just following social rules. Emma herself had continued her newfound mission of spreading kindness throughout her daily life. True to the plans she had made in her hotel room, she had organized her classmates to make thank you cards for their school's custodial staff, brought homemade cookies to their mail carrier, and started a tradition of leaving small notes of appreciation for the crossing guard who helped them safely cross the street each morning. Her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had been so impressed by Emma's initiatives that she had incorporated lessons about community appreciation and service into their regular curriculum. Emma's example had inspired other children in her class to look for their own opportunities to show gratitude to the adults who worked to make their lives safer and more pleasant. "Emma has taught us all something important," Mrs. Henderson told the parents during a school meeting. "She's shown us that even the youngest members of our community can make a real difference, simply by treating others with genuine respect and appreciation. Her approach to the world has had a positive impact on our entire classroom culture." Meanwhile, back at Buckingham Palace, Emma's drawing remained prominently displayed in James Mitchell's quarters, but its influence had spread far beyond his personal space. The story of the little girl's gesture had become part of the informal oral history shared among the guards, told to new recruits as an example of why their public role mattered and how their service could touch people in unexpected ways. Captain Reynolds, the commanding officer of James's unit, had heard the story and used it during training sessions to illustrate the importance of maintaining dignity and professionalism, even while recognizing the humanity in their interactions with the public. Emma's respectful approach had demonstrated that genuine connection was possible, even within the constraints of military protocol. That young lady understood something that many adults miss, Captain Reynolds would tell new guards. She recognized that respect and protocol don't have to eliminate human warmth and connection. Her approach allowed Guardsman Mitchell to respond appropriately while maintaining his duties, creating a positive interaction that honored both the traditions of our service and the basic human need for acknowledgement and appreciation. James himself had indeed shared Emma's story with his family in Scotland, just as he had planned. His mother had been so moved by the account that she had started her own tradition of writing thank you notes to service members, inspired by Emma's example of reaching out to express gratitude to those who work to keep others safe. "That little girl reminded me that I raised you to serve others," James's mother had written to him. "And her story reminded me that those of us at home have our own responsibility to support and appreciate the people who choose to serve." She may be just 8 years old, but she taught this old woman something important about not taking good people for granted. One particularly meaningful development had occurred when James received permission to write a brief thank you note to Emma, sent through official channels to ensure it reached her properly. The letter, written on official palace stationery, expressed his continued gratitude for her kindness and encouraged her to keep spreading the positive attitude she had shared with him. Dear Miss Emma, the letter read, your drawing remains one of my most treasured possessions, not because of its artistic merit, though it is quite excellent, but because of the genuine kindness and respect it represents. You reminded me that our service has meaning beyond ceremony and tradition. It touches real people like you who notice and appreciate the work we do. I hope you will continue to share your wonderful spirit with others, as you have clearly been raised to understand something very important about treating all people with dignity and care. Emma had read this letter dozens of times, each reading filling her with the same sense of joy and validation she had felt during their original conversation. But more importantly, the letter confirmed what her grandmother had always taught her, that kindness given, freely and sincerely, would almost always be received with gratitude and appreciation. The ripple effects of Emma's gesture continued to spread in ways she couldn't have imagined. Tourists who had witnessed her interaction with the guards began approaching their own encounters with service members differently, inspired by her example of treating them as real people rather than tourist attractions. Some had shared videos and photos of the moment on social media, but focusing on Emma's respectful approach rather than treating the guards' response as mere entertainment. A travel blogger who had been present that day wrote a popular article titled "What a Little Girl Taught Me About Real Respect," describing how Emma's example had changed her own approach to travel photography and interactions with local people in traditional roles. The article encouraged other travelers to consider the humanity of the people they encountered, rather than viewing them simply as part of the scenery. As Emma's 9th birthday approached, she found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since that remarkable day at Buckingham Palace. She hadn't become famous in the way some children might dream of, but she had discovered something much more valuable, the deep satisfaction that comes from connecting with others. Through genuine kindness and respect, her experience had taught her that extraordinary moments could emerge from the simplest gestures, and that treating others with dignity and appreciation was not just the right thing to do, but also a source of joy and fulfillment for everyone involved. Emma's story had become a testament to the power of childhood wisdom, grandmother's teachings, and the basic human need for recognition and connection that transcends all social boundaries and formal protocols.